Hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains. Welcome to Epic Realms. Our guest today is the brand manager of Pinnacle Games and one of the head designers. He's worked on multiple games in the Deadlands genre, such as Weird West, Wasted West, Noir, Dark Ages, not to mention his work with Savage Worlds, and so many others. Please welcome my guest today, John Goff. John, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I have a question for you. What was kind of your intro into just the role playing genre itself? How long ago was that?
Oh, good grief. Wow.
Coming out with the
You're
easy
making me
ones.
feel insanely old. I started with the red box D&D, the old basic set where, halfling was a class because I grew up in a very small town in Appalachia, and I just happened to stumble across it in this, what was the Walmart of the late 70s in our area. And picked it up, and this was when, I don't know if you've ever seen the old Rankin Bass Hobbit cartoon that came out back then.
Yeah.
So it just captured my imagination. And that's what I got started with.
Okay.
And then I staggered into AD&D and actually found a group of friends who were into it. It was a very eclectic group, but we played frequently, more than once a week, in my parents' basement through high school.
As happens, right?
Yeah, it was pretty much Stranger Things minus the other dimensional mind eaters. So,
What at what point did you decide that was going to be your career? Did you plan to do that, or were you like, did you do other things and then eventually you got into that?
so in college, and this was probably my junior year, or the year that my college and I decided we needed to see different people for a year. I got very heavily into writing one-shot adventures, and one of the using at that time G.U.R.P.S, because that was the universal system that
Yeah.
we had back then. And I wrote up this very detailed horror adventure. And one of my friends, whose name is Shane Hensley, said, "Hey, you should talk to this guy in our friend circle, Addison Hunt, who had at that time in college written stuff for a game called Thieves World, which was based on a collection of short stories that came out of various books." And we were all really into that. And the fact that this guy, in our friends group was writing for a game set in that universe was just amazing.
Right.
He read it and said, "This is good. This is really good, but you don't want this to be the first thing you submit because they won't pay you what it's worth." He said, "You need to do other stuff." And I didn't do other stuff. So I got out of college, enlisted in the military, and did 2 tours, got out, came back to my home state, Virginia, and started getting in touch with old friends from college. And one of them was Shane Hensley, who had
Yep.
been in my weekly gaming group. And he said, "Hey, I'm glad you got in touch with me. I just wrote this game, and we've got a game company, and I want you to take a look at it." And he sent it to me, and it was Deadlands. And I read through it, and I'm like, "This thing's great. This is amazing. I love it." And he said, "Well, I'm glad to hear that because I really liked our games back in college and the stuff you wrote then. So I'd like you to try to write for us." Um, and well, here's the thing: I have partners, so you can't just start out. You have to go through the same process everyone else does.
Right.
Once you do, write us a web page piece. It's single page, and if that proves you can write complete sentences, we'll move on from there. And I did, and then they said, "Well, now I want you to write a couple of convention adventures," and I did. and they liked those. So from there, we moved to these products they had called dime novels.
Yeah.
They were named that because that's what the penny dreadfuls in the weird in the old
in the
West
Old
were.
West, yeah.
Yeah, they cost a dime. They were, pulp stories. And they said, Shane and his partner at that time, Matt Forbeck, said, do us a dime novel. It's half fiction, half adventure based on the fiction or vice versa. And that's when I wrote the first thing I ever had published. And oddly, I think to this day, the thing I'm still best known for, it was called Night Train. And it was about basically a drain full of vampires. And that one just captured everyone's imagination. And from there, I went to reading over one of the first source books they released. And then I ended up writing the second one, Hucksters and Hexes. And maybe the third, Fire and Brimstone, and then on from there. So it was something I had thought about getting into.
And those are some core books for that system. Like when you wanted to play the game, other than the main book, those books, those two that you just mentioned right now, those were huge content pieces for people that wanted to play certain roles.
Oh, absolutely. And I would like to claim that's because of what I wrote, but honestly, I kind of fell into those and ended up getting that one. And from there, that went on, and I wrote not a small amount of original Deadlands source books. And then when Hal Mangold moved on, I took over as the line editor for the Weird West for a year or two.
Okay.
And then after that, Pinnacle went through a bit of a rough spot. And we partnered with other companies and so forth. And that didn't always, it wasn't always the easiest of partnerships. And I eventually departed to pursue civilian employment, shall we say.
Right.
And but I maintained the relationship. I still would work on things for Pinnacle, like when we did the D20 conversions. I worked on the first one of those. And I was originally going to work on the first of the Servitor books, The Flood. But I had an inconvenient heart attack, and someone else, we decided it might be better to pass that off to someone else. So, okay. But I stayed associated with Pinnacle that whole time. And I would say right now I'm in a very, I would describe my relationship with the company as unique.
You were kind of telling me about that a little bit off before we started. When you were playing with Shane and that group of people before Pinnacle even happened.
Yes. I actually was running games with Shane as a player back before he could legally drink.
Wow. And for those that don't know, Shane was going to join us tonight. Wasn't able to. We knew this a couple weeks ago that he wasn't going to be able to join us. So we will get Shane back on the show down the road. But Shane is the founder of Pinnacle Games. So when we talk about Shane, now you guys, everybody who's listening knows who we're talking about, if you didn't know already.
The guy that created Deadlands, among many other things.
Right.
The creator of Deadlands, Savage Worlds, and he's worked for an enormous number of video game companies too. So.
Right. When you were working with them and they switched from the regular system to Die 20, and then of course from Die 20 to they kind of moved over to Savage Worlds. What was it like? Was that just, were you there when they were like, hey, we need to switch up the system and just change how the system works? Or were you more of a, this is a storyline? How is
we never really, I wouldn't say we switched to D20. It was when Ryan Dancy kind of opened up the D20 system for just wide usage. And it's when they had opened
Open gaming license.
Open source document, maybe is what it was called. We just decided that, you know, it might be a good way to bring people into our setting if we also release this in a format that they're more familiar with, because D&D 3 and 3.5 brought a lot of people into the gaming world, not nearly as many as 5th edition has, but so it was kind of just more of a side to it. And then as they progressed into the system that I think Shane had really kind of always wanted to create, which was what we now know as Savage Worlds, which grew out of the miniatures game that we had developed for Deadlands, Great Rail Wars. And once they decided that, you know, okay, we've refined this to where this can be the core system to our RPG, at that point, it was just a no-brainer to flip Deadlands over to that.
Right, because Savage Worlds was more of a kind of like the modern generic universal roleplay. I mean, GURPS is still around, but this is kind of like what it is now, because you guys have all these adaptations, which we'll get into later down the road. But when you were working on those things, you mentioned the miniatures game. You had a pretty decent hand in the miniatures game too, didn't you?
I wrote 1 or 2 supplements for the Great Rail Wars, and was always heavily involved with everything that we did with it. But I would say that was more Shane and John Hopler's baby than mine. But you know, there you go.
You had a hand. That's
as in most things back at that time. So
you did do a GURPS book, correct?
Warriors. I did one entire one, and I revised another. I revised Special Ops, largely due to my military background. And from that, they gave me GURPS Warriors, which was a book of various warrior archetypes and examples in different settings. It was actually a very intensive book to write.
How is that for you, going from a person that, you know, played it and then going in and being like, I get to write for these guys?
Oh, it was pretty neat. You know, emails from Steve Jackson and the line editor and so forth. Because that was back before I was really heavily into Pinnacle. Actually, it was one of the last things I did before I went full-time freelance from my real world job that I picked up when I left the military. And then once I went full-time Pinnacle, I've just kind of always been there. I did a few things for Vampire the Masquerade, because I liked writing for the line developer at the time. I got along really well with him, but since then it's almost been entirely Pinnacle, because it's just kind of like, I don't know, it's home.
Did you play Vampire the Masquerade or any of the World?
Yes, I did in the military quite a bit.
Did any of that have a little bit of hand in your night train?
No, actually, because the decision at the time was, among other things, we did not want that type of vampire in the Deadlands universe. We weren't looking for a large group of rational abomination.
You just wanted bad guys.
Right. That really didn't fit with our view on how things worked in the Deadlands universe. And the other thing that shaped that was we didn't have vampires in the Deadlands universe when I wrote the book. And that's kind of an environmental thing. I mean, when you think about the Old West and you think about vampires, you've got wide open spaces and a lot of blistering sun. So the question was, how do they get around? How do they survive? Because they can't just sit in one town of 30 people. they're going to clean them out pretty quickly. So they have to have a way to move around. And it just became a thought experiment
Okay.
in how they would, get a train. Why would they have a train? Who would man the train, etc.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, definitely. And then they spanned that between just from the Weird West. That was in the Wasted West too, wasn't it?
yeah, yes, I managed to get my fingers in.
Well, why not? Why not continue
I
the story?
I don't know if I got them into Lost Colony. I did write the creatures into Noir, but now that I think about it, I wrote a type of creature of the sort into Lost Colony.
So let's talk a little bit more about Savage Worlds. As we mentioned, Savage Worlds is kind of like a generic system. They bridge the gap of multiple different. You can put different worlds in there. You can use it however you want. What is the difference between, for our audience that doesn't know, the difference between Savage Worlds and G.U.R.P.S as far as a universal system?
There's several. G.U.R.P.S is a much more crunchy system, and by that I mean it rules are a lot tighter, and there's a lot more, just to simplify, math involved, both in character creation and what you do. G.U.R.P.S works around a single type of dice, and that's the D6, and usually multiples thereof. Savage Worlds, on the other hand, delineates each ability and its underlying skills by a die type.
Okay.
So you use almost all of the dice that you got in your D&D dice set. You're going to D4, D6, D8, D10, D12. D20s come into it occasionally, but you don't have to have one as a player. Usually the only time it's going to come in is if the game master needs to roll on a table. And instead of handfuls of dice, you're usually rolling 2 dice as a player. So it's a trimmed down, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, we talked about this beforehand. Now I forget words in mid-sentence.
Yep, right there with you.
Streamlined system, I think, to some degree, in that there's less calculations, there's less math you have to do in your head. Everything's a little bit more simplified while still being different.
Right.
So
then my other question is going to be, and I'm sort of, it's not really backtracking, but I'm kind of backtracking. How does that then different? How does Savage Worlds differ from, say, the Deadlands Reloaded? Because they had the Deadlands and then they did Reloaded and Savage Worlds. What's the difference there?
If we go all the way back to the original Deadlands, you can see some of the underpinnings of current Savage Worlds rules, in that Deadlands use the different die types to represent abilities and skills, but they use multiples of those die types, and the combat system was a lot crunchier and grittier, in that it tracked wound locations, it tracked a non-lethal form of damage, and so forth. And it was really fun for shootouts and relatively small combats, but a lot of people found that once you got into larger battles, it could really slow down, thanks to all of that fine-tuning,
right,
or crunchiness. And that's why we got a simplified version with Great Rail Wars to make the miniatures battle go much quicker. And from that, it simplified down and then got a little more complex for the RPG, but not terribly so, I don't think.
Okay, cool. Well, we did mention that there's been multiple, like, I don't want to say adaptations, but things that Savage Worlds has kind of branched into. You guys, obviously, Deadlands, Mage Knight, Rifts, and Pathfinder stuff. And you guys have kind of, you did, not the one that's Kickstarter right now, which we'll talk to in a bit, but you did, was it Rise of the Rune Lords you guys worked on?
Yes, the first one was Rise of the Rune Lords.
How is it taking some of these systems, some of these worlds, such as Mage Knight and Rifts, Pathfinder, and converting them to Savage Worlds? Is that difficult to try and be like, it's like fitting an apple into a square hole.
No, I've been on the periphery of both of those. Shane's been smart enough to bring in people that know those systems inside and out, and also know Savage Worlds. And we have whole teams working on Pathfinder, for example. We have
Right.
we have an entire group devoted to that. And we were lucky to get Sean Roberson for Rifts, and he's been instrumental in bridging that. And Rifts was probably the one that proved to a lot of people that we could fit just about anything into the Savage Worlds rule set.
Gotcha.
And I've no doubt that helped, talking to Paizo for converting first edition Pathfinder.
Yeah.
And I might be mistaken, but I believe Sean has since gone on to actually do stuff with the original Rifts game now.
Okay.
So serve both of us well. But converting the rules hasn't been as hard, or it didn't seem to be that as hard to me as it might be to someone who's not as familiar with the rule set, because people, like, one of the things was, well, how are you going to do mega damage? And the first thing that leapt to my mind was, well, those are just heavy weapons and heavy armor. And that's exactly how they ended up representing it.
Okay.
And something like Pathfinder, to me, probably took more work, because the leveling system
Right.
that is such a big part of D&D, Pathfinder, those type of games, it works differently in Savage Worlds. We have levels, but they're not, or we have advances and ranks,
Right.
which don't represent as large a jump as a level usually does in D&D or Pathfinder.
Okay.
Usually, you go up a level in D&D, or if it's one of the benchmark levels, it's this amazing boost in power. Often, you get to a new spell level, or you can shape change into a different type of animal, or
Right.
your die types go up in this particular ability, things like that. In Savage Worlds, those progressions come a little slower, like a die type will raise once. But they usually come a little quicker. So there is a challenge to that, but the Pathfinder guys have just knocked it out of the park, I think, as exampled by the fact that this soon after the Pathfinder Kickstarter, we have the interest we have in the next adventure path that we've kicked out.
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's talk about the next adventure path. And I really want to talk about this. How much did you have a hand in the new Curse of the Crimson Throne that is currently on Kickstarter?
I will be completely honest and say absolutely none.
Okay.
The guys working that are doing it on their own, absolutely on their own skill, and they just do a great job. I mean, they don't need any veteran hand there beyond Clint or Shane occasionally suggesting rules tweaks, I don't think.
Okay. So asking you questions about how it came to be and why they chose that over the other settings and stuff like that, it aren't necessarily questions you'd be able to answer.
Well, I think that setting was chosen because it's almost, I won't say universally, but it is one of the adventure paths that is most favorably reviewed.
Yeah.
It wasn't one of those that, well, let's roll a die and pick it. They picked it because it's well liked.
Yeah, I think it and Rise of the Rune Lords are two of the top
right.
ones. So and personally, speaking from personal experience, we just finished Curse of the Crimson Throne for Pathfinder,
right.
and we were doing it live on our stream. So it's really interesting. I'm very curious to see how they've changed stuff and how things have translated over and what changes they might need to make between for system to system. And for those that are listening to the podcast, just go to Kickstarter, look it up. You can look up Pinnacle Games. You can go to their website and pick that up. And if you want to play through it, if you don't play Pathfinder, but you play Savage Worlds and you want to play that game, That's your chance. That is your chance.
Yeah, I do get to see the preliminaries,
Okay.
and they fire them out to all of us to look at and make suggestions or comments, and they look amazing.
And that's a partnership with Paizo. That's not like an open gaming license. They just said you're okay to
Right,
build this, so you guys get to
exactly.
use the same images, some of the images and pictures and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So that's really awesome.
If you have had a chance to look at the box set for the original, it's just incredible. I mean, the stuff that they packed in there, the art is, I can't say it's all original. I mean, all Paizo's original art, but it might be.
Okay.
I haven't gone through it with a fine-tooth comb.
Right.
But they have used they've gotten the rights to a tremendous amount of that art, and the layout, the formatting, and everything, plus all the little tchotchkes, the little extras, are
Right.
just incredible. I mean, I'm glad we have these guys on board because they're doing a great job.
Right. Well, and I mean, they've hit their goal. So I mean, anybody who backs it right now, they're literally 140,000 above the goal.
I think they hit their goal within the first few hours.
Right, right. So there's a ton of stuff that's going to be extra for people that want to get in on that and get that. So it's kind of a no-brainer for any Savage World and Pathfinder fan, especially if you want to play in Galarian on Savage Worlds. So what about some of the other stuff that you've worked on? You mentioned Vampire and stuff. Is there any other things that you've worked on beside, any other like role-playing games or board games that you've worked on that maybe people don't necessarily know about?
Not that are still in print.
Well, what about stuff that's not in print?
Let's see. I worked on I can't even remember the name. It was something for FOSSA.
Okay.
It was an airplane miniatures game, and I cannot remember the name. And I hate that because it was set in the in an alternative late 30s, and it was designed around air dogfights and so forth. It was a fun game. I designed a bunch of aircraft for one of the books, and I enjoyed it so much I designed extra aircraft, and the line editor liked those aircraft so much that he stuck them all in. So, but unfortunately, neither Crimson Skies nor Crimson Skies is really around that much anymore.
Right. Sure.
But beyond that, I kind of just dug into Pinnacle like a prairie tick, and was kind of happy to be there.
Right.
Because it let me really get into the setting lore and actually develop a whole lot of that. Right. And there comes a point where you're like, I know this, I know all of this, so why do I want to, go through the process to try and get jobs at other companies when I get all the work I want right here?
Right, exactly.
But one of the things I've always wondered about is trying to write for D&D, because when I was, a 14-year-old, that would have been amazing. But
right.
40 some years later, maybe not. There's a lot of hurdles to jump and establish yourself with them, and learn their writer's Bible, and learn exactly how they want everything done. And I'm an old man. That seems like a lot of work now.
Do you still get time to role play yourself just for fun? Or is it just like role playing rolls around and you're like, this is work, this isn't fun?
I'm fortunate that my wife does as well. And used to be, whenever I would run games, it would be something that I was playtesting to release, like Noir or Dark Ages or Fear Agent or Lost Colony. All of those, I was constantly, I would be writing it and testing it against my group, because if it was going to break, they would break it. Right. Not by playing smart, but by doing exactly the wrong thing whenever they could. But So yeah, for a long time there, it was work, and that does go a long way towards taking the fun out of
Right.
playing. But fortunately, my wife is giving me a break right now and running a D&D campaign for us. And because some of our other players have, real lives, we get together every other week
Okay.
instead of every week. So, and I'm working on actually a D&D campaign that I'm going to try to run, because I'm going to see if I can make the challenge rating system work and get around some of the issues with encounters per day. So
Is this 5th edition, I'm assuming, that you've been playing?
yes.
Okay. Are there any other
Yeah.
systems that you really enjoy role-playing that's not necessarily
Uh,
Pinnacle or D&D?
Let me think. I don't know how many I have played recently. I love running Call of Cthulhu because it's just a death sentence.
Yeah.
I like playing it because I like to see how long I can avoid that, that last killing stroke, or in
Right.
most cases, the first killing stroke. But beyond that, I've got a shelf full of games, but I don't get a chance to play too many anymore. I would say those Savage Worlds, D&D, first edition Pathfinder a few years ago, I played a lot. We even brought back second edition AD&D and
Nice.
tried running that, and that's, in my opinion, a nightmare.
They're like, THAC0? What's THAC0?
Oh, I remember all of that. I just remember I've cast my one magic missile. I have a dagger now. What am I supposed to do? But yeah, beyond that, I'm so tied up with a lot of the stuff that I'm writing that I often don't have time to dive into learning anything new, and or going out and finding new groups.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly happy with playing with my old college group and my wife and leaving it with that. So
does Shane still play with you?
No, Shane lives half the majority of the continent away over in Arizona, and we all play in person here. We got it was one of the things we looked for when we went house shopping when we moved back to Virginia, was one that had a game room, a room suitable for a game room. And we've got one downstairs, and probably the most expensive piece of furniture we have in the house is the table that we got for gaming at.
Nice.
And then so I mean, even during COVID, for the most part, we were still gaming in person. So
okay. All right, $1 million question. Are you ready?
Are you really going to give me $1 million? Because that's going to
no, I'm not. But it's a catchphrase. Do you prefer being a GM or a player?
I prefer playing.
Okay. Any particular reason?
I am a problem solver.
Okay.
Both as a gamer and in real life, and being a player lets me solve problems, lets me take different approaches to them, and so forth. So that's it, plain and simple. I usually GM though, because nobody in my group outside of my wife is willing to take that on.
All right, tell us about the comic books. You were talking to me a little bit off screen about the comic book stuff you were working on and working with. How did the comic books come about, and are you guys publishing that yourselves, or are you going through a company?
I don't know how much I can talk about that, but we are working with a company called Outland. Get the name right. Outland Entertainment. They have done other comics for us in the past, and we are working with them to publish some of the stuff, some of our fiction, as well as some of the comics, and both a Weird West comic and a comic for Deadlands Dark Ages, which is very important to us visually, because it's going to be one of the things that helps set the visual tone for the setting.
Right. Awesome. How did that connection, because you mentioned the older comics, how did that partnership come about?
That would be a Shane question.
Be a Shane question. All right, let me put that on the list. Shane, next time, right there. Are you excited? Do you read a lot of comics?
Yes, actually, I have the DC Unlimited app on my tablet, and I probably read 3 to 4 a night before bedtime. So, yeah,
Nice.
I'm very interested in seeing this hit the presses.
Who are some of your favorite DC heroes or villains? I guess villains are kind of cool too.
Well, hands down, and this is the tried answer, but it's Batman.
Okay.
Beyond that, probably the Flash. Although I think that, if he were consistently written, he would just basically be, I don't know, God, for a lack of intent. I mean, when you look at what the some of the powers that they've given, particularly the Wally West version, is just insane. And they just vary back and forth between what he can do, and it's I've had lengthy conversations with my wife over. You realize that to be able to move this fast, his reaction speed has to be at that level as well, which means he's impossible to ever land a blow on or even shoot with a sniper rifle, because the second he feels the pressure of the bullet, he just moves. You can't kill him.
Right.
And I nerd out a little bit too much about him. So, but the number of things in my my other professional career that I have solved by going, well, what would Batman do in this situation? Is uncountable. So
awesome. Well, again, for those listening, Curse of the Crimson Throne Kickstarter is coming out. It's already out. It's got 10 days left, I believe.
yes.
So people can go ahead and join that. Do you know if there's going to be doing other Kickstarters down the road? I know Shane mentioned there was some other stuff coming in the works, but he didn't specify to me when we were having this conversation, and I just was going to throw to him. But I don't know if there's anything you know about that you can talk about, because that's always the key word, that you can talk about.
I'm looking at Curse of the Crimson Throne now just to make sure. This is they have a name for this type of Kickstarter that they're doing, and I cannot remember what they call it, but this was one where they are not firing out a lot of stretch goals, if any.
Okay.
It's basically, this is what you get, this is what we're going to provide for the amount of money that you get, and it lets them kick it out quicker.
Okay.
And keep a better handle on the costs and prices. They actually have a term for it, and for the life of me, I cannot remember it right now. You're lucky I remember that we're still having this conversation at this point in my life. To my knowledge, there will be a Kickstarter for Deadlands Dark Ages this year.
Okay.
When, where, who, what, all of those, and the why, I could not tell you. This has been something that has been on the slate for more than half a decade. So we are at this point doing art, and as I said, Simon, who's kind of the going to be doing the editing on it, Simon Lucas, is in Wales and Britain right now, and he's actually doing a lot of real life tours of the locations that appear in it, and kind of getting a hands-on, first person look at everything to make sure that my descriptions match reality. So I'm pretty sure we should be seeing that sometime late fall, early winter. Beyond that, I'm not sure what else we have in the pot right now, because Pinnacle has grown enormously the last couple of years. We actually have departments within the company now. It used to just be 5 people, only 2 of which were full-time. Now we have entire lines set off. So
yeah,
it's very difficult to keep track of what everyone has going on, but there's a lot.
when you're talking about the Dark Ages, and again, I don't know what you can and can't talk about, but there's a certain, I don't want to say theme, but there's a certain characterization. There are certain characters that are kind of throughout Deadlands.
Yes.
But how can, is there a system? Is there something, a story set up where they exist there, or is this going to be all brand new everything?
Well, if you look at all of our different settings, they're almost always, there's one consistent thread through all of them, and that's the Herald
Yes.
character type. Beyond that, we have kind of general concepts. And as other than Shane, the only person that's written in all 5 iterations, actually, right now I'm the only person that's written in all of the iterations, since he hasn't written anything for Dark Ages yet. We have character concepts, I guess you would say, that we try to carry forward. There's the arcane background, which are our magic systems,
Okay.
that are based on good. In Deadlands, there's a blessed. They are generally preachers or followers of a religion who are very devout. In Hell on Earth, that's the one where they kind of disappear. In Hell on Earth, and also to a lesser degree in Noir, because both of those are much darker settings.
Yeah.
In Dark Ages, they're going to be represented by what we call the Saints.
Okay.
And they aren't necessarily all priests or anything like that. They're just simply people that have been chosen by the powers of good to help humanity. We also have those who trade something for their power.
Okay.
The hucksters in the Weird West who gambled with the Manitou, and then we have grifters in Noir who basically make personal sacrifices to get what they want, and so on across the board. And those are going to show up as sorcerers in Dark Ages.
Okay.
We have the science-based ones, whether they were the mad scientists in Weird West, the patent scientists in Noir, the Junkers, or the Breakers, and so forth in Lost Colony. In Dark Ages, they're the alchemists and so forth. So there are parallels for virtually everything. I tried to make sure that we kept that thread going in.
Awesome.
To the connections. And the other thing that's kind of surprising about Dark Ages is Britain, in the time frame that we've set it, is very similar to the American West in that you've isolated communities, very few people traveling between them, warring factions, warring countries, and so forth. And the more I wrote into it, the more I'm like, wow, I had no idea how well this would mirror over. So
cool. Well, then that being said, let's talk about some of their social media, shall we?
Sure.
Everybody who's listening, if you want to check out Pinnacle Games on Twitter, it is at PEG_games, Instagram at Pinnacle Ent Group, or Facebook /Pinnacle Ent Group. You can also find all of this information, guys, all of it on peginc.com, PEGINC.com. And they're also on Twitch, which is /PEGINC as well. So thanks, John, for joining us tonight. We're going to do some Q&A with the live stream chat here in a bit, if you want to stick around for that.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, cats and dogs and everybody else. July 25th, we have an episode podcast. It's not our normal interview episode. I'm going to be joined by my friend Adam to talk about our podcast, how the show came to be. We're going to promote some of the people that have worked on it, such as the person that does our audio, some of the people that have worked for our live stream and everything else. So if you want a little behind the scenes look at the podcast and kind of how it's done, we're going to do that because we're prepping for our trip to Gen Con. So that'll be July 25th. August 8th, though, we're going to return to our normal show with Gen Con's guest of honor and one of the most known D&D authors out there. We're going to be joined by R.A. Salvatore. He's wrote Drist, Brunor, Caddy Bree, Artemis, Jaraxel, and so many more. So join us August 8th for that. I want to thank you again, John, for joining us. Everybody who's listening, be sure to follow us, like, subscribe, rate, review, all of that stuff, because it helps us and it helps our guests. So thank you so much, and make sure to join us next time for Epic Realms.